Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to a new episode of Agahi with your host, Warisa Zainab. We're going to cover a topic today that is now being neglected and ignored in most organizations that could have done something about it. It's not talked as much as it should be talked about on most media platforms, the refugee crisis. And I'm not talking about the current refugee crisis, I'm talking about the Syrian refugee crisis that has been going on for a decade now. With us, we have a brilliant doctor, Dr. Siana Maruf Shafi, who is going to tell us about the brilliant work that she's doing to help the refugees who are living in places like Lebanon, in Greece, who are not talked about or discussed much. Dr. Siana is a GP by profession, and she qualified as a GP in 1994. But because of her passion for humanitarian aid work, she slowly changed her attention towards the work that she does. And I'll welcome our guest for today, Dr. Siana. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, Warisa. Thank you for inviting me to your program.
Jazakumullah khairan for accepting the invitation, because I know you must be exhausted from your recent trip. You've just come back from Lebanon. So I'm eager to hear about the work that you do with the organization that you're affiliated with. If you could please share that information with our viewers so we can learn about the work that you do.
Okay, thank you very much. So I suppose I have a really boring story to begin with. I became sort of an ordinary doctor working as a GP, trained in the UK for my primary and secondary qualifications, my master's. I became a GP in inner city of London with Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital. And I kind of did the straight thing of just going through and working. And of course, in the midst of all that, as a woman, I got married, I had children, so I had the family to rear and bring up. And I mentioned that side by side because I obviously made a very early decision in my life to do that. I think as a woman, it was not an option to sacrifice my family for my career. I kind of got a bit greedy and I wanted to do both. And now I think more recently, I found myself more interested and becoming greedy again, and this time greedy for possibly the right thing in the ajr and the kind of reward for maybe doing the thing that is unthinkable or really difficult, which is to support those in faraway places with poor access to healthcare. And my first entry to that was in 2015 during the European refugee crisis in Greece, in Lesbos Island. I had a chance to just go for a very quick humanitarian mission, my first ever humanitarian mission, I should say. And before I even mention about my own humanitarian mission, I want to mention people like Dr. Abbas Khan. I don't know if you are familiar with Dr. Abbas Khan. He was a member of my community and actually a father at my children's school here in South London. And one of the first times I actually got to know about him was when I met his wife in the school playground after school. And I noticed she looked a bit sad and a little bit tearful. I didn't know her very well, but I started talking to her. I'm always drawn to people who seem to need help. And she started to tell me their story. And Dr. Abbas Khan had made a secret mission. He had left his family, his work. He was working as an orthopedic surgeon here in one of the London hospitals. And he decided to take a secret mission, a humanitarian mission. This is very close to the onset of the Syrian refugee crisis, so nearer to 2012.
Right.
And he had gone missing while he was serving in one of the hospitals in Syria. He had received a call to go and help somebody who couldn't be brought to the hospital, and that was the last they saw of him.
Really?
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, one of the it didn't end well in a way, because he was eventually found, but he was found detained in a prison in Damascus, where he was being tortured. Apparently, his mother flew from Streatham in South London. She made the unthinkable journey, and it's people like her, women like her, because actually, here was a mother on a mission to find her missing son. She went against all travel advice at the time, because at that time there was an active war going on in Syria. And certainly all the guidelines for travel restrictions, even after the pandemic and COVID, is still that these areas are considered red zones, and the UK government will not support people who choose to fly there. But of course, people like Dr. Abbas Khan, who inspired me, and I'm trying to be safe, obviously, when I do this, but I do feel that there is a greater good to be gained by sometimes stepping outside the box and doing these extra things. So he lost his life, sadly, because he was found hanging in his cell the day before, the morning that the mother was due to fly him back. They agreed to release him. They found him hanging in his cell. And of course, you can just draw your own conclusions. But if you look it up, the BBC have written a nice piece, a nice story about it.
And I think this is just one example that you have shared. I'm sure there are thousands out there that are not talked about, not discussed. But, we can't, praise these unsung heroes enough for risking their lives for other people, for the sake of humanity, who only have the passion to serve the creations of Allah. That's such a rewarding thing to do. And I know this is one of your life goals, to serve humanity. And you've just come back from Lebanon, and you go out there, you meet the refugees, and you offer your professional services. Before we talk about the charity that you established and the one that you work for, let's watch this short clip of Dr. Siana's most recent trip to Lebanon, where she was helping refugees living in the refugee camps, and the work that she did. So we'll join you soon. Welcome back. So this clip that you watched just now is from one of the most recent trips that Dr. Siana has carried out. And let's ask Dr. Siana what her experience was like when she was there. So first of all, tell us about how this journey started. I'm sure this is not the first time you've been to these refugee camps.
Actually, no, it isn't. It isn't the first time to refugee camps, but I think I've become braver over the years. My original intention was actually to go to the Syrian border, as the stories, the images on national TV were quite clear about the horrors that were going on, a bit like what's going on in Ukraine in present time. And you are drawn, for humanity's reason. And before I launch into the Syrian border activities, I do want to mention that as a humanitarian, it's not that we pick and choose which humanitarian disaster means more of is more important or more valuable to spend time on. For me personally, when I was as early as 9 years old, I remember watching the film called The Holocaust about obviously the massacre of the Jewish population. And that was one of the first times, I think, deep down inside me, a chord was struck that how can one human being do this to another human being? How can human beings even begin to be treated in this way? Now, those people were the similar color, if you like. I know people can argue about shades of white, yellow, pink, and gray, but they looked white for all intents and purposes, and they still got treated badly. And for me, it's that very fundamental thing that we all need to bring ourselves back to, is that we no matter what, if you're alive and you're listening and watching this, we're all human. I hope at the very least we are all human, and we can relate to that. Okay, but for me, I think it was a case of one thing after another. So of course, there's natural disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes. Those were always difficult for me too, especially being Sri Lankan. My parents were in Sri Lanka at the time of the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004. And I remember those moments of horror when I couldn't get in touch with them. And I thought, is this it? But alhamdulillah, my parents are still alive and well in their 80s now. And for Syria, I think it was for me like the final straw, sort of an inkling of humanitarianism was revived or activated when I saw the Gaza bombing happening in my lifetime. My children saw that happening in their lifetime in Palestine. And
you've lived there, right? Briefly?
I've been there. I haven't lived there. No, I've been to Palestine. I've been to Palestine. I haven't been to Gaza. But I make every effort to go there as often as I can. And this is one message that I would strongly encourage every single one of us, is to make that niyyah, that intention, that as the pandemic sort of starts to recede and restrictions on flights, etc., start to recede. I mean, the very last trip I made, I didn't even have to do any PCR testing, which is incredible. To kind of reach that level, we kind of couldn't see the end in sight, could we, at the beginning? But I think we can all do this, no matter what your profession. You don't have to be a doctor. And that's the other message I would put down, is that when I go there sometimes, although I am a doctor, and yes, I can assess and analyze and see things and maybe identify the most vulnerable people, that's probably what I can do. But
I think you also have the benefit that you have lived in the Middle East. So
yes.
You can speak multiple languages, because language is often a barrier in communication with, with these people. So for you, that's not a.
It can be, and yes, I have had the pleasure and the benefit of being able to grow up in Saudi Arabia, where I learnt a form of Arabic, which isn't the kind of Arabic they speak in Syria, by the way. So I had to relearn all my Arabic, but I think it's more like, you get people who speak English perfectly, and then you get people who don't speak English perfectly, but you still manage to communicate with them. I think I speak Pidgin Arabic, and I get away with it because I think the bottom line is they read it in my eyes and they read it in my heart and in my actions. And yes, of course, for medical consultations, it's good to have a few extra vocabulary words. Some of the doctors who traveled with me recently, they were using Google Translate, and apparently on the iPhone there's an app that you can just speak in English and the app will speak back in the language that you want to speak to. Yes, of course, language is helpful, but don't let it be a barrier, is what I would say. Don't let it put you off, because actually the biggest gift that I learned from the visits to the camp is that they were absolutely dumbfounded, and so such heartfelt warmth came from them. Just the fact that we visited, that you came to see us, you mean you haven't forgotten about us, and the first woman I met there was actually a woman just like my mother. She was like a mother replacement to me, and you'll see her in some of the videos. And she was telling me, how they were just an hour away from where they used to live in Syria. A lot of them are from Homs and Aleppo and Damascus and all those places that we saw the bombs landing in. And they thought at that time, yes, the bombs are pretty crazy at the moment, we need to get away, and we'll just go for a few days, maybe a few weeks, maybe a month, and then we'll come back, we'll be back in time for Ramadan. And that was 10 Ramadans ago. 10 Ramadans ago, and no sight of any possibility of being able to return. People do, because the Lebanese government, obviously, so my latest visit was to Lebanon, and the Lebanese, Lebanon is going through a massive financial crisis, massive political challenges. They're currently having elections again, and just like Greece was when I first went there, it was the poorest country in Europe, Greece, and now Lebanon is probably the poorest country in the Middle East. I
think according to one statistics, 1 out of every 5 people in Lebanon is actually a refugee. And out of all the countries in the Middle East, Lebanon is one country where you'll find like tons and tons of refugees who have come from Syria, from Iraq, from, so many other parts of the world. And they're mostly being neglected, and the country doesn't have enough resources to help.
No, and I think that's what it is. If your own people are already suffering, where do you draw the line? And I think something I observed as a commonality between Greece and Lebanon is the local people, as kind and as benevolent as they want to be, how long can they do it for? Now, in Greece, they did it for 3, 4, 5 years, and then the steam ran out. Lebanon, they're doing it for 10 plus years now, and they're running out of money and resources for themselves. So their thinking is, their government's rhetoric, I think, is Syria is now a safe country and people should go back. Now, I don't feel that way. When I traveled, even just to get to the border between Lebanon and Syria, I was given
Yes.
a huge amount of warning. Be careful, travel during the day. There are kidnappings, there are armed gangs. And one of the restaurants we went to, one of my colleagues has a photograph of this. As you go into the restaurant, it has one of those swivel doors. And at the top of the swivel door, it has an image of a gun and a sort of a red line, like no entry, but with a no guns allowed in this restaurant. So, I mean, this is a country where that's the way it is. I suppose it's a bit like America, really. There is a gun culture.
Mm.
So for those people who've left, they left watching houses falling apart around them, children, families being massacred, shredded.
The infrastructure is gone. The infrastructure is completely gone.
And what about the sense of, will you ever be able to feel safe going back to that position?
And go back to what? The houses are damaged, hospitals are damaged, schools are damaged. There's nothing for earning your livelihood. There are no opportunities.
No.
So even if you go back, there's no future, there's no hope.
Not really. And I think the other sad thing about this, and this is something that as we complete one Ramadan and maybe plan for another year in the Muslim world, I would encourage us to think about the differentiation and the division that happens. In Lebanon alone, there are about 70 different factions of communities, so many different types of Muslim. Sunni Shia is the basic one, but there's 70. I mean, I don't know what they are. Alawi, of course, and and then of course there are Christians there too in Lebanon. But I do feel like we need to try to think, what do we achieve by all this differentiation amongst ourselves and splitting and changing boundaries. There's so many things I need to say, so just direct me whichever way you want me to go. But
in regards to Lebanon, I know most people, when I tell them this, they are absolutely shocked. A few months ago, I was there and I went to a pharmacy to buy something really basic, and they said they don't have it. So I was like, okay, where can I go? Like, could you direct me? Can I get it from somewhere else? And they were like, you won't find it anywhere. And I was shocked. I was like, how come? This is like the most basic over-the-counter medications and stuff. And they were like, we are going through a time in Lebanon where you will not be able to find the most basic things, basic painkillers and, medications, even important medications for cancer treatment. And, because of the circumstances that they are in, they can't even get basics like nappies and baby formula milk powder and things like these. And I was just thinking, how on earth are you guys surviving? And how come nobody's talking about it?
And that is an important question. That's a really important question. I mean, you're talking about basic medicines, but I want to mention a couple of the patients that I met who have basically revived my niyyah, helped me revive my niyyah to keep going back and helping in whatever way I can. One of them was a 15-year-old boy. His name is Karam. He is an orphan boy being brought up by his grandmother, who is herself very old and tired, and he has an older brother. Unfortunately, Karam suffers with a blood condition called hemophilia. And for those of you who don't know what that means, he is born without one of the blood clotting factors in his blood that will just help him to stop bleeding. Subhanallah al-Azim, this is how intricate our human bodies are, that he doesn't have a factor called factor 9. And so he has to have this since birth. He's had to have artificial injections to replace these. Now, he's the second patient with a blood disorder that I've met in my 7 years of doing this work. It's very rare. But I think his is particularly distressing because he's so young and he's managed to get to 15 years of his life. And when I first found him, his grandmother was holding in her hand 3 ampules of the last ampules that she had, that she carried with her from Syria, and they were expired.
Oh dear.
But it's okay, because as a medic, I know that actually expired medication has got a value in it. It doesn't become poisonous, not for everything. Some things you need to be cautious about, like even I think suppositories, they can melt in the sun, anything that can be affected by the heat. But the injections, they were okay to use. And in fact, they had been okay because that's all he had to use, and he was surviving on them. And then he ran out about a month ago, and they had a bout of snowfall, and all their toilets are obviously exposed and outdoors. And he slipped in the toilet on the snowy, icy snow, and he injured his knees and elbows. And immediately, in a child like him, he will bleed into his joints, and it can cause. I mean, if there's any lads out there who play football or rugby or any other sport, you'll know that you've seen them on the football pitches in matches, if they bleed into their knee, it is excruciating pain, because the knee capsule has only so much space in it, and when blood goes in it as well, it puts a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pain, and grown men cry from it. And this little boy, he just became really, really quiet. His tears were rolling down his eyes, and he kept saying, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. I listened to him recite Quran, by the way. These are children who are so pure. And this is another reason why I'm so drawn to them, because they don't have the luxuries that our kids are used to.
Yes.
They don't play with iPhones and tablets and
they don't have, some of them don't
Nintendos.
have a single toy. I've seen the state of these refugee camps, and I know they've got nothing. They don't even have the basics, let alone like the luxuries you're talking about. So yeah.
No, the friend I stayed with, so I actually stayed with my colleagues who were there. I responded to a call that came to me about a year ago. It took me a year to sort myself out. Obviously, we had the pandemic in full blow last year, and but this year, alhamdulillah, as soon as things were starting to lift, that was the first trip I wanted to make, and I went to visit her. So I stayed with her in her tent, in her family's tent. Her mother is a widow, so it's just her and her mother. But their kitchen is basically their storage room, as well as her changing room and her dressing room, as well as her shower. So when she needs to have a shower, she just has to fill up her bucket in the kitchen, and that's where she has the privacy to be able to bathe. And I have to say that I just couldn't do it. I couldn't have a shower because it was just still, it was just literally open space. And so I didn't have a shower for 7 days while I was there, or 5 days at least, while I was in the main tents. But this is normal for them. This is what they've had to accept. I mean, it isn't normal and it's not unacceptable, but this is what they've had to accept. They've had to live with.
Some of these families, some of these people have been living in these camps for a very long time, right?
So most of them have been there for the 9-10 years. All the children who under 10 have been born in this area now. So they're born in the camp. The other thing that I was always just shocking really is that they're not allowed to build anything more than half cement blocks and half tarpaulin / tent material, because they are still considered temporary dwellings. The Lebanese government don't want them to live here permanently. And so once or twice when people have tried to build brick all the way up, the government has come and kind of demolished those structures, and they've had to go back to having half brick, half tent, because there are floods, there's snowfall and showers. I mean, they've only just come out of winter now, and then now in the summer, I'd be interested to go and see how it is. But I felt the heat just in this springtime as I visited. But the summertime, I mean, they've got electricity. They're going to, it's like if anybody's been for Hajj during the summer months and been in Mina, Arafah on those days. I know I have a long time ago. That is serious heat. And 1-2 days for Hajj is quite a different thing to many, many months every single year. Every single year. So when we fast, when we go for Hajj, when we go for Umrah, and we feel that little bit of discomfort, we really need to be reminding ourselves very, very strongly that this is reality for many, many hundreds and thousands, millions of people actually living in refugee camps.
Siana, you regularly appear on BBC World News, right? And you often talk about these issues that are often ignored. Why is the media silent? Why we have suddenly gone quiet about this as if it's all been resolved? Although we know it hasn't been resolved, people are still stuck in these refugee camps, and it's been a decade. These children, I mean, what future do they have? Do they go to school? Do they have any hope that they'll get a decent job to sustain themselves? Like, what's going on? What's the reason behind this?
I mean, I think everyone can probably guess what attracts people to highlight certain types of situations and not others. But in my opinion, I think the philosophy I believe a lot of governments employ in the refugee scenario is out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, so if we don't hear about them, we don't speak about them, maybe they'll disappear, burying your head in the sand type scenario. And of course, that's not true. And these people, they have no oil, they have no gold or diamonds. What value are there to the materialistic world that we live in? But this is where we come in, because I am only me. And as I said, I'm only a humble doctor, but I felt that since I began my 7-year journey 7 years ago to go and visit these people, it makes a difference, because when you see it for yourself, you do get inspired to talk about it, to write about it, even if it's just a WhatsApp message saying, guys, I don't like what I'm seeing. Here's a quick video, and that's enough. And I think people are waking up.
So how can
go on, yeah.
How can people like us, so for example, our audience, how can they help? Because not everybody has access to visiting these places. Not everybody can travel to these conflict areas. Alhamdulillah, you have the passion, the desire, and the courage to go to these refugee camps, whether it's in Greece, whether it's in Lebanon, where have you. How can we support your cause? What can we do to support your organization?
So for my organization, I mean, thank you. I would like to say that actually both locations I've traveled to in the recent past, they are as easy as booking a flight ticket and just going. My next challenge is Yemen, inshallah. So let's see. But in terms of my organization, I am only a very small organization, and I'm a doctor, so I'm not an administrator and a manager or a finance person for that matter. But there's always help and support needed. Like, we run our organization based on volunteers. We have about 2,000 registered volunteers. Now, they're mostly doctors and nurses, but they're not all doctors and nurses. So that's something that I have relied on purely because I personally, before I became the doer, I was also a donor. And I was always frustrated of not knowing where my donation, how much of my donation money was actually making an impact. So I sort of wanted to do it for myself. And that's kind of what I did. Having contributed as a donor to many, many, many other charities, I decided that let me try and see how I go. And so this is what I'm able to do, is that I don't pay myself, for example, to do this. I still work as a doctor in the NHS, and that is what my bread and butter is. But the money that comes into our organization, I try my best to make sure the majority of that will go to the destination where it needs to make a difference. Now, that could be buying medicines. It could be supporting, like I have I also tend to work with, and this is really, really important to me, I tend to work with the local people who are themselves either living in those places or living in the camps. And I like to provide them with some incentives. So one of my team members, for example, at the moment, he lives in Kabul in Afghanistan. And the reason he got in touch with me was because his brother worked with me in Greece. And when the events happened last summer, when there was the government change in Afghanistan, he was desperate to get out. So I said, okay, I don't know how I can help. I'm just me. I don't have special political powers. And I said, how many people are in your family? And this is all on WhatsApp. 17.
Wow.
17, 2 parents, 2 wives, assortment of children, sisters. 2 brothers are already out of the country, but they are themselves just grappling with the whole asylum process. So not in a position to support 17 members of the family they left home. So this is the eldest brother, and he was left to fend for them. And he was in hysterics. I mean, if any man can put themselves in that situation when they don't have a means to provide for their large family, it's very distressing. It's very, very distressing. So, and sometimes when I talk with him on Zoom, I see his father in the background who comes to give me salam or make dua for me. He'll stand in the background holding his hands like this, making dua. It's really heartening. And all I could do was I said, look, let's find a way. I found out what his skills were. He's actually, he used to work in the banking industry. So he's really clever with finances. And he's helping me manage from over there my financial accounts, my spreadsheets, my ins and outs.
Working.
Yeah. And of course, there's all this boring stuff that has to go with an organization, but I give him a small amount. I just pay for a little bit of his expenses. Like he said to me for iftar yesterday, I said, what did you have for iftar? Just because we happened to speak shortly after his iftar. And he says, oh, I had some, alhamdulillah, I had some rice, some banana and cucumber. I said, oh, okay. And what else? Oh, no, that was it. And no meat. Of course, because family members of mine will collapse if I said to them I wasn't serving them any meat at iftar time or any time in Ramadan. And he says, no, that's far too expensive. We can't afford that. You know, we're living on absolute basics here, and they get river water for drinking.
I'm also keen to learn. What I've observed so far is that there are challenges that they go through, these refugees, regardless of where they are. They don't have running water. They don't have access to electricity or Wi-Fi and healthcare, and that's the main goal that you have, to provide healthcare.
Yes.
What kind of problems do you come across on a regular basis when you go to these camps? And I'm not talking about basic things like fever and flu. I'm talking about like major issues.
I mean, in terms of the medical needs.
Yes.
So with Lebanon, I wasn't sure what I was going to find. I thought, maybe surely there must be someone there. MSF is there, by the way. Médecins Sans Frontières is a very big organization, and they were very happy to show me around when I visited them, and proudly showing me all their setup. Oh yes, we deal with pediatrics, we deal with pregnant women and chronic diseases. So this was one of my passions, is the support of those people who are on long-term medications. And I thought, oh, great, fantastic. This means somebody's doing the job, but I don't need to come here. Job done. I'll go find somewhere else in the world that needs me. Alas, the reality is it all looks good on paper. It looks good on presentations. But when it comes to implementation and actually at the patient level in terms of access, I drove 2 of these patients myself in a taxi. I put them in a taxi and I took them there. Before I left, I said, I need you to engage with these guys, because they, I was telling the patients this organization seems to have everything set up for you. So one was Karam. Karam, all they could do was pretty much what I did, which was they wrote a referral letter to a hematologist somewhere in Lebanon. They didn't know where. Please,
Wow.
can you help this boy to acquire his replacement injections? Don't let me end without telling you what happened actually with Karam, because it was a positive outcome, and it is thanks to the good British people.
Let's hear the complete story, because we only have a few minutes left.
Oh,
So.
fine. Let me tell you now then. But I think that, so that letter obviously was futile, because nobody in the whole of Lebanon can prescribe or acquire his injections for him. So then it came back onto me, and I very rarely have sleepless nights. Alhamdulillah, it's one of the blessings, but this was one that kept me sleepless. And I went on Facebook and I put a call out, and I found there was a Facebook group for National Hemophilia Society, and I joined it. And I explained who I was. I said, I'm a humanitarian doctor. I'm come across a young lad who needs these injections, and I've tried to acquire it through my contacts in the hospitals and, you know, high up people in the NHS, for example, and their hands are tied. Like very expensive drugs, I think the injections cost between £300 and £500 a pop.
Wow.
So with a very expensive treatment like this, they need to be given out on a named patient basis. So the only people, so that's when it twigged that the people I could go to was possibly the patients who've already been given these. So I contacted them, and one mother of a 5-year-old son with hemophilia here in the UK.
Yeah.
Ted is his name. So Ted's mum responded to me on Messenger and said, hey, Sienna, I've got some in the back of my fridge that I haven't been using for some time. Would you like me to send these to you? And that's what she did. She sent me like 10 ampules. And then shortly after that, we put I was encouraged by that. So I put on our mailing list, I put a message out, and I got a response from someone in Dover who then put some in the post. And this is what I carried with me. When I went back, I carried those injections with me, and colleagues of mine and me, we took them back and we gave it by hand to his grandmother. And it's just, but of course, this is not the end of the story, because although we found a possible way to get a supply to him, I need you also to know that on the National Directory for Hemophilia Centres, there are national centres around the world which are supposed to be dedicated centres for providing haemophiliacs with these life-saving injections. The nearest one to Karam, who lives in Arsal, the northern border of Lebanon, the nearest one for him is in Israel.
No way.
So, of course, Lebanon and Israel don't talk to each other.
Mm.
And part of me, I think that was going to be my plan C, was I was going to write to them and say, look, because there are good humanitarian doctors and nurses who are in Israel. They support the people in Palestine and Gaza when things are going wrong over there. And I thought that would be my plan C, to go back to them and say, look, we need to acquire and see if we can get a regular supply, even if it means one of us flying in, collecting it, taking it by hand and flying out and going across the border. Can't go across the border, you have to come out and go round. Anyway, the point is, when you make an intention and you don't sometimes know how you're going to fulfill that intention, whether it be a pledge, whether it be in this case to go and visit these people or to serve them and carry medicines. I think if it's sincere enough, Allah will show you the way.
Of course. And that's what Allah says, that you take the first step and you make that intention, and He will support you for that cause. Now, Dr. Sienna, coming to the main focus for this program. As you know, Agahi is all about spreading awareness about psychological well-being, mental health, spirituality. And one of the key areas when it comes to supporting people who have escaped conflict, war, man-made or natural disaster, apart from leaving their homes, their livelihoods, their education, and everything else, it all takes its toll on the human mind. and often the trauma that they have been experienced to, it results in multiple like issues, from post-traumatic stress to the symptoms of post-traumatic stress and so many other things. And I know one of the things that your organization offered to these refugees in Greece, and I still remember this was a few years ago, you offered trauma tapping service to some of the refugees, and there's no need for communication as such. This was like an emergency first aid for mental health. Please tell our viewers about this.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for bringing this up, because obviously it's so easy to focus on the physical trauma that is in your face, and the psychological trauma is much harder to measure. But I would say from my experience of working with refugees, 99% of them have carried with them psychological illnesses. It's usually post-traumatic stress. It can be forms of anxiety. It can be forms of schizophrenia, which could have been tipped by the significant trauma that they were exposed to during wars in particular. So trauma tapping was introduced to me in Lesvos when I was found by colleagues of mine from an organization called the Peaceful Heart Network. They're from Sweden, and they are the ones who have worked and pioneered developing the technique. We call it TTT, trauma tapping technique, from their work in Rwanda during the genocide in Rwanda, maybe 20 years ago now. And the key features about it is when we go through traditional methods of psychological treatment, such as talking therapies, so CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, psychotherapy, straightforward counseling processes, you like you say, you need language. But more importantly, even if you overcome that barrier and you get an interpreter, what you're doing is you're opening up potentially very traumatic memories and experiences and opening up a can of worms effectively in a setting that is still very, very unstable. So a refugee camp, shared showers, toilets, limited water, sanitation is not a place that you can say is stable enough for you to be doing deep psychotherapy with patients. So the essence of tapping is that we tap parts of the hand and the face. There are certain points, and these are actually correlating with acupressure points. So if anybody's have acupuncture, there are certain points in the body that if you tap, you stimulate nerves, which can have a calming effect on the body. And for anyone who's interested, if you just go to a website called Self-Help for Trauma, because that's the other thing, is a self-help technique. Self-Help for Trauma, I think it's .org. And you'll find a lot of, it's a very simple website, again, by Peaceful Heart Network, with about 27 different languages and a downloadable app, so you can have it on your fingertips, literally. And we've started introducing this in our primary healthcare clinic in Greece, because the people who came in with panic, anxiety, even high blood pressure, so like if they were so bad sometimes and already on maximum medication, I would try trauma tapping. And the other part of it is so beautiful, is that you don't have to live in a refugee camp to try this. I would actually encourage everybody to try this and to inshallah benefit from the calming effect that it can have, and a great time to implement this for Muslims in particular is on your premats. So we sit there 5 times a day, we do adhkar. That's a great time to pick some points on your hand, and you can just do the hands only version if you're short of time. We're quite used to doing our adhkar and dhikr with our fingers, our tasbih, so you can just add that in. But yes, maybe an opportunity for us to have another chat show just about
definitely that. Because I'm sure you've got like tons of stories to share, and I mean, I don't know how many cases you have seen so far. I don't know if you can put a number on that, but We have so much to learn from you, Dr. Sayani. You're such an inspiration, mashallah, and may Allah give you the strength,
Ameen.
the courage, resilience, and resources to continue doing the work that you are doing, because people like you are a source of hope for the hopeless. These people who have been living in these camps for a decade, I cannot imagine living one day outside on the street, let alone in a camp where there are no sanitation facilities, toilets, shower, basic things, forget food and everything else. I don't know how these people are surviving. I can't even like
Your mind won't let you go there because it is challenging, to say the least. I mean, when I first came back, I was obviously it's hard to see this and come back and live in luxury, which we do. I mean, most of us in the, just to have electricity and running water is a luxury.
Roof on our head.
Exactly. And I actually said to my children, I'm going to turn the electricity off between these hours so we can just have a sense of what it feels like to and they thought I would gone bonkers. They you know, they really sparked off. But that's my kids for you. We live such a sheltered life, you know. But yeah, I think it's good to put things into perspective, and thank you for drawing attention by allowing me to talk a little bit. By the way, it's in Greece alone, in 1 year we had recorded 22,000 consultations, patient consultations.
In just 1 year.
In 1 year, yes.
Wow.
But
what is the total number, like an approximate number of refugees from, I think, mostly Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, you know?
So in Greece, that number changed quite a lot. It was mostly Syrian to begin with. And towards the end, what happened was that even in the refugee asylum service, there's a kind of order, if you like, pecking order. The Syrian refugees were prioritized, especially when the war was active. And it was the most active war at the time in 2015. So they were allowed to move out. But the people who remained there are the ones with least priority, which be Afghanistan, because Kabul and Afghanistan, although they have chronic problems, they don't have an active war, so they were not seen as a priority. So there was this kind of internal division and so that's what ended up being, is that a lot of the people there were mostly Farsi speaking in the end. There were some from Africa, parts of Africa, who made it there, DRC, Republic of Congo. But of course, in Lebanon, it's quite a different story. They're all Syrian. They're 100% Syrian.
Because the border is so close and people can just cross from, you know, Baalbek or what have you.
I don't know how much time we have left. I can't see the clock. But
so your last final message to our viewers. I mean, I had so much to talk about, but we've run out of time, unfortunately. Yes. But maybe we can have a part 2 if you're available, inshallah.
I'd love to. And particularly if you get any feedback, I can certainly address or spend more time on the areas. So I was talking about incentive payments that I like to pick the 1 or 2 people living in the camps who are able to help me deliver this, because obviously I don't live there. I haven't been able to, since I also have a family here and responsibilities here in the UK. But one of them is a teacher. She's called Noor, and she works with us. She's an English teacher from Syria, and she's the mother of 4 children. And she fought to leave the camp because she wanted for her children to have an education. She fights every day, every moment of her living day. She tutors them, every single one of them, in their studies. They do get to go to the Lebanese school, by the way, the children there. They go for half the day. So the Lebanese children go in the morning. Once the morning shift finishes, then the refugee children are allowed to use the same school, which is really nice to know about that. But she walked across the border with her 3 children that she had at the time by herself. It took her 6 hours. And she's now dedicated to, so when I send doctors, when I go myself, if we need support, like translating, acquiring medicines, taking patients for further tests in outside towns, outside where the refugee camps are, which they have to pay for, then people like her help me to deliver the care. So my message is, as much as we are supporting food packs and all these are important, shelter, one of my key things in my organization, because I'm quite small, is that I would like to keep supporting these individuals who are clearly smart, talented, and fantastic humanitarians. And they want, despite living there, they're not asking me, just get me out of here. They're saying, look, all right, as I am here, what can I do to help you? So help me to help them. And that's something that I would encourage everyone to look into organizations you're working with and see who those people who are actually delivering the service at the ground level, how much are they getting?
Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan, Dr. Siana. I can't thank you enough. And to all our lovely viewers, if you have any questions, feedback, or anything that you would like to share with us or Dr. Siana, please feel free to message us on our Hidayat TV's Facebook and YouTube page. You can also call in our studio and leave your contact details or request for Dr. Siana's organization's details, Katrina's Healthcare, which you can easily find on the internet. And let's support people like Dr. Siana with the amazing humanitarian aid work that she is doing. May Allah reward abundantly in this world and hereafter. And we have to end the show now, unfortunately, because time's up. But I'll have you again, and we will continue our discussion, inshallah. Till next Saturday, look after yourselves, and I'll see you again with another guest and another topic regarding your mental health and psychological well-being. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum salam.